joining us today. I know everyone is very busy, so we're going to aim to keep this meeting to the scheduled 2-hour time limit. Before we get started, I just wanted everyone to be advised that at about 2:20, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, in coordination with the Federal Communications Commission, is going to be conducting a nationwide test of the emergency alert system and the wireless emergency alerts. So while that shouldn't really substantively affect our meeting, you might want to turn your mobile devices off now, just to avoid that sort of jump scare that happens when everybody's devices go off at the same time. So that's just in case anybody would like to avoid that. Next slide, please. So for anyone observing this meeting, either live or via WebEx, this is a meeting of the Climate Justice Working Group. This is not a public hearing or forum. We're not going to be taking testimony or questions from the public during this meeting. The Climate Justice Working Group meeting is for work group members to provide feedback on the Heat Island study today. So therefore, no voting or deliberations on the criteria or other official business will take place. If you're attending, we ask that you remain respectful and refrain from raising your hand or attempting to draw attention or interjecting at any point. And as always, to reduce noise, please remain muted unless you are asking a question. Raise your hand or type stack in the chat and so we can call on you. And since this meeting is being broadcast via WebEx, try to state your name before you speak just for the transcription purposes. Next slide. So now we're just going to go into the agenda quickly. Next slide, please. So today's agenda, we're going to have a presentation on the Heat Island study required under Chapter 563 of the Laws of New York from Mark Laurie, the Assistant Director of our Office of Climate Change, and Dr. Theodore Endry from SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. After the presentation is over, we'll have some opportunity for working group members to maybe ask any questions they might have. And once we're done with that, we can have a quick discussion about what our next steps are for the Climate Justice Working Group. In addition to Mark and Dr. Endry, there are staff here from the Office of Climate Change who are also here to answer any questions that might stem from this presentation and provide any insights that might be needed. With that, I will turn things over. Oh, Eddie, you have your hand up.
Hey, sorry about that. Hi, I know we have a packed agenda. Quick question.
Sure.
Will there be an opportunity to ask, I guess, 2 questions about specifically DEC? There's a Section 7 notice that was posted recently, which clearly has implications for the Climate Justice Working Group. Will we have some time to talk about off-topic or other? And the heat conversation is of vital importance to us. Don't get me wrong. So I'm looking forward to it. But just wondering if there'll be opportunities to ask questions about that and one other DEC air question.
Yep, we're going to get to that at the end. So I set aside time specifically to talk about that. All right. Any other hands? No. Well, with that, I will give it to Mark Laurie. Mark.
Thank you, Alana. Next slide, please. Good afternoon. Again, I'm Mark Lowry. I'm the Assistant Director of the Office of Climate Change here at the Department of Environmental Conservation. I certainly want to thank the Climate Justice Working Group members for this opportunity to discuss our plans for improving New York State's resilience to extreme heat through what I hope you'll agree is an exciting project that we are planning with our partners at the SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry. Next slide. I'm eager for you to hear about the project itself, so I'm not going to take our valuable time to delve into the risks that are posed to residents, communities, businesses, et cetera, by extreme heat. We've lived through that this past summer. And I think we'll all acknowledge that the risks are greatest for residents of urban heat islands, outdoor workers, and certain other vulnerable groups. Next slide. And extreme heat will only become of greater concern as we move into a future with a changing climate, a future that we should not be calling a new normal, but recognize that things are going to get progressively worse for the foreseeable future. And we must prepare for that, the greater hazards that climate change is likely to bring to our communities. Next slide, please. In 2022, The legislature adopted and Governor Hochul signed legislation that requires the Department of Environmental Conservation to conduct a study of the impacts of the urban heat island effect on disadvantaged communities. Next. The statute requires that the study include recommendations for action and funding to address the effects of extreme heat. It also requires DEC to identify the locations of heat islands in urban disadvantaged communities. DEC intends to comply with this latter requirement through a project to map areas of potential exposure to high heat across the entire state, and that project is our topic for the day. I'll note, however, that in her 2022 State of the State address, Governor Hochul directed DEC and NYSERDA to develop an extreme heat action plan. This planning process is underway, and the plan will include recommendations for action and funding as required by the legislation. Although that extreme heat action planning process is not the topic for today's discussion, Dr. Leo Bockinger, who is leading that work, is here in case you have any questions about the extreme heat action planning process after we hear about the mapping project. DEC has selected a team at the College of Environmental Science and Forestry in Syracuse to undertake this mapping project. This team is led by Dr. Ted Andreni and includes partners from the U.S. the U.S. Forest Service and the Davey Institute. Climate vulnerability is a function of exposure to climate hazard, sensitivity to that hazard, and the ability to adapt to the hazard. The Urban Heat Island Mapping Project will address the exposure part of that equation. It will be designed to identify areas where residents, workers, or others would most likely be exposed to higher temperatures under both current and future climate conditions. This independent measure of potential exposure can then be integrated with other measures of sensitivity and adaptive capacity to identify those communities or those individuals that are most vulnerable to the effects of extreme heat. Measures of sensitivity and adaptive capacity could include such things as locations of disadvantaged communities or more specific measures of vulnerability, for example, certain health conditions. Our ultimate goal is to provide a resource that would allow DEC and other actors to more effectively target policy and program interventions to address extreme heat risk. Such interventions could include, for instance, investment of Bond Act or other funds to mitigate the urban heat island effects and to reduce heat health risks faced by vulnerable individuals and communities. The project will also permit mapping of emergent or future areas of extreme or dangerous heat, considering factors such as land use change and changes in surface reflectivity, impervious cover changes, climate change itself, and other drivers of changes in temperature. Dr. Andreni and his team, members of his team are with us today and will now describe the planned project, and then we will be happy to answer any questions you may have. So next slide, and Dr. Andreni will take over.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ted Andreni, and I'm at the State University of New York College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And I do acknowledge the teamwork that we have had with Mark Lowry and his group at the DEC Office of Climate and my colleagues with the U.S. Forest Service and Davey Institute. These tasks are organized into parts A and B, and I'll explain that as we go along. And I'm starting off with this slide deck that Mark produced to recognize that we've been working with his office for approximately half a year to identify what their goals are and how they would be manifested into a set of tasks. So part A that we are looking at now will help provide for the Climate Justice Working Group a tool that will allow for scenario analysis of what we are referring to as the urban heat island and how that can be mitigated or it can be reduced through activities that we have at our disposal. To get to that end goal, we need to work through the set of 6 tasks identified here in these bullets. And I will read these out just so everyone is clear on which ones we are talking about. The first task under Part A is to generate a hottest hour heat map and then analyze the effect of that heat across our disadvantaged communities in New York State. And this hottest hour heat map is a historical product, and it is likely to be from the years 2011, 2012, which we have identified as some of the hottest years that we've had in New York State. We have looked at El Nino years, and we will consider those as well, but as of now, it indicates that it will be 2011, 2012. And these are a single hour, and they will be of air temperature and heat index. Those are two ways that we describe extreme heat. And these maps will be for existing land cover at the time that that weather was sitting over New York. And the idea with this team mobilization within the task is to create a product within the first 3 months of our project that can be given over to DEC and other partners to start visualizing how extreme heat tends from this one analysis to lay across our state and our communities so that they can start working in their outreach and the other work that Leo has been heading up. Once we are done with that, we are going into our toolkit, and these we refer to as our iTree tools. And these are tools that exist on the web right now. One tool that we are relying on is iTree Cool Air. In this model, we made this available to the DEC, explaining it is publicly available and that it will be used for this project. We will need to update the functionality of that tool to achieve some of the goals that the DEC has identified. So this second task is taking existing tools and updating them for new methods, new data sets, and new outputs. This will take some time, and the reason that we are taking this hottest hour map at first step is, again, to mobilize the team and not have to wait for us for these newer products to be generated. Once we are up and running with new iTree tools, we are going to be simulating, which means we're going to be in the model computing the likely air temperatures that we have experienced across New York State. And we're doing this for a past 10-year period and a future 10-year period. And we will be using climate data provided by a team from our U.S. Department of Energy that is intended for heat wave and urban heat island analyses. This third bullet is the brunt of the work for what we call base case scenarios. We will be looking at a land cover type for the past that is defined by what land cover had been, and we will be looking at a land cover type for the future that is based on what best predictions say it will contain. And these base case scenarios will provide 3 different heat metrics. I mentioned 2: air temperature, which we all are familiar with, heat index, which is what often is referred to as a real feel, and then there's a wet bulb globe temperature. And we will look at every instance of an extreme heat event across those 20 years, and we will perform statistical analyses on those events. And we refer to this as an intensity of the event, the duration, how long did it last, and the frequency, how often does it occur across those 20 years. And we will know those values for every one of our census tracts and our disadvantaged communities so that we can start on step 4 to rank the heat exposure of these communities to these extreme heat events. Once we have gone through step 4 of that ranking, we are providing what we call a static interface, meaning that we preload maps and products to a website, and we allow communities and employees within our state to interact with that and to find out what we have determined from this analysis. Throughout this entire part A, we will have a working group, and we're hoping that the Climate Justice Working Group will have a representative member that will be developing that end goal I mentioned at the beginning, which is a public-facing toolkit that will be interactive, not static, and will allow for analysis of heat mitigation scenarios. If there are any hands up that you'd like me to acknowledge at this point, I'm happy to do that. And if there are none, I would ask that we move to the next slide for Part B. Thank you. So we are now looking at the last 5 tasks that we are proposing to achieve with this project. This Part B is contingent on us successfully completing Part A. I appreciate that we were pre-warned that that would happen. I also will take a moment now to see if anyone has any concerns about what just occurred. We were told that there would be a warning that was sent to all of our devices, and I believe we just experienced that. Okay, so that came at good time. We had just transitioned from our Part A, where we had 6 bulleted tasks, and that work, if it was deemed sufficient by our DEC partners, we will then proceed on to Part B. And so these 5 tasks are now to move from this analysis of a base case, which I was explaining earlier, which is the one land cover scenario that we have lived through in the past and that we anticipate to be the most likely land cover in the future, moving in the direction that we are currently moving. Part B, in a nutshell, is now manipulating that land cover and other properties of the land, including the wetness, which was a key driver and will be a key driver for how our urban forests can cool these cities. And so we will be creating alternative scenarios. So the first bullet is to develop these mitigation scenarios. And as might be evident from my colleagues being in the Forest Service and the Davey Institute, which is a tree research and service company, and myself at the College of Environmental Science and Forestry, and our tool being named iTree, the scenarios that we lean toward are urban forest scenarios. And so we have forests and trees in our cities already, and we have inventories of those and many. And on average, we know we have too few trees for the services that we need, including the cooling and the mitigation or the reduction of the urban heat island. So that will be one scenario type that we examine. And as I've mentioned, water is a key ingredient. We'll be looking at, do we need to irrigate or provide additional water to our trees? And many of you might be aware that there are properties of our physical environment that affect heat absorption, its retention, and its release. And sometimes scientists refer to as albedo, which is the reflectivity. We'll look at changes in that. You might have heard of things like emissivity, and we'll be looking at other material type properties that could be changed. Once we are done with those mitigation scenarios, we will also analyze their intensity, duration, and frequency of the heat waves from the past 10 years and the future 10 years under these new scenario types, with the presumption that there will be less intense, shorter duration, and less frequent. And that will be our guiding star toward which scenarios are the most effective. Once we are done with that second bullet, we move to generating illustrative example case studies, how the modification of tree cover and other properties in your environment lead to a mitigation or a reduction of your urban heat island, your extreme heat. And we're going to create those case studies with the intent of representing different geographic communities throughout New York in order to provide examples that can be used as an encouragement or roadmap for many more communities than we can work with on our end, but to enable communities after we're done with this project to look at the case studies and come up with a relatively similar approach or combine some and come up with innovative approaches to heat mitigation. While this is going on, we will also be building this front end dynamic toolkit that will allow for people to interact with a server and data set and conduct their own scenario development. Fifth bullet is to affirm that we have the capacity, if we are supported by you and the DEC, to continue to update this toolkit annually to provide new model features, new data, and perhaps new mitigation scenarios. That's a lot of information. I apologize for coming in perhaps too high for some people or being too low for others. And I propose to Mark that I can show you a set of slides that explain the iTree model and builds up a little bit more slowly, providing building blocks for what we're talking about in terms of how the model will do this. And it also, these slides contain some more details for those that are eager for that, including some of the equations and theories that are at work. And if there are no hands up, I would ask that I transition to showing my slide deck.
I don't see any hands up at this time. I do want to point out that Eddie Bautista from New York City EJ Alliance has expressed interest in his organization being involved in the study.
Thank you. I'm hoping that Mark or of DACs that we will work with in scenario development, that they guide us along. Okay, given no others, I'm going to share some of my slides, and just give me a moment to turn on the sharing of this slide deck. Am I able to get confirmation that you can see my slides?
Yes, we can see them. They just need to be in full screen mode.
Okay, and I'm trying to do that. Looks like
Yep, you're good to go.
for me, it's interesting. I can't see them on my end. It looks like not even in the first slide. So give me one moment. I'll share one moment and try my entire system. Yeah, unfortunately, I am not able to see my slides there. I don't know if you can see anything, but I'm only seeing a white rectangle. What does the audience see at this point?
Yeah, we're seeing your edit mode, Ted. So I think if you go to slideshow and tell it to start from the beginning, you're about the middle of the band there under the ribbon where it says
My
slideshow.
system, thank you for that guidance and tell me what you're seeing. My system is not responding. So I'm going to stop one more time and see if I can do this once more. I might revert to printing them into a PDF, which wasn't what I was expecting. I may need to remain out of the full slideshow deck and just try to bring them up one by one. Burden you with and another option, depending on the timing, is I've sent the link to this to Mark, and Mark might be able to open them.
I would recommend you just go through from where you are now, because we are seeing your first slide.
Good. Okay. So let me move my over here. So you were given a motivation by Mark when he started, and I want to reiterate that. Here I'm illustrating that our whole nation is seeing extreme heat like we haven't seen before. And we are aware that our governor is concerned with those implications and has convened this group and has initiated this mission that we are on to map the heat. But there are other implications that we are aware of that relate to this, including the mitigation that we might approach using energy to drive air conditioning units and other space conditioning. And there are inequities there as well. And so we want to get in front of this. And we are, with this motivation, recommending that the iTree tools be considered as part of the approach. And so I want to introduce these iTree tools because a lot of our project work is going to be based upon them. So they are a freeware, meaning there's no cost associated with their use, that are publicly available, and they are developed in a consortium that was led by the U.S. Forest Service, Data Institute, and supported by ESF, as well as other partners. The tools that are in this top row are tools that some of you may have worked with in the past. They have been on the block longer. ECO is one that cities across the US and indeed the world have been using to collect data, to go out and measure tree species, diameter, condition, and then estimate the services provided by those trees that relate to building energy costs, air quality, stormwater pollution, as well as carbon sequestration. The iTree Landscape is a tool that's an online map viewing tool that allows for an overlay of environmental forcing conditions or environmental pollution and environmental services, as well as an overlay of census or demographic information. So we can look at vulnerability and exposure. And then the other tools that come along are tools that have taken a lot of the data generated by ECO and put it into different formats. So you can look at your community with our tree. That's something that very rapidly will tell you more about the place that you live and how many trees you have there and what environmental services you're receiving from them. And then My Tree is a tool that allows you to go even smaller than that and look at the value from any one single or group of trees you might have in your life. And then for those that are interested in some citizen science or have their own projects, Canopy is a tool that allows you to sample aerial imagery and take an inventory of land cover types. We have remote sensing that can give us estimates of trees. We often presume that those are high accuracy, but they've been shown to undercount. And the heads up or human photo interpretation of using Canopy provides a more accurate estimate of your tree cover, and it will provide a benefit estimator for your community. And then Species is one of our many tools that helps you identify what tree types you want to plant. You might have certain services you want from that tree. You might want something that has low allergen count. You might want something that is green all year long. You might want a tree that has a certain maximum height because of power line concerns, etc. And this tool will help with that. And many of these tools and the science within them will be informing our project as we go along. In the bottom row, we immediately are showing cool air, which is tool used to help communities cool down their urban heat islands. And this tool has within it a hydrology tool to help with the relationship between the water and that cooling. And that can be run independently, and it's called iTree Hydro for stormwater analysis. And then we have tools for looking at how we can cool rivers, make them more habitable for our desired species, native fish, for example, and how to reduce building energy use, and how to manage our landscape so we have less nitrogen and phosphorus entering our waterways and causing harmful algal blooms. So this is an overview to give you a bird's eye perspective of what the iTree tools are. And now we're going to go into this cool air tool. So this is a cartoon sketch, and the sketch is showing us a rural forest. And this forest has a vertical cutaway where we can see the groundwater below the soil. And we see these blue and red polygons showing us that it's a delta S or a delta G. And it's like, that means a change in S or storage of water and a change of ground heat flux. So our ground is wetting and drying. It's heating and cooling over time. And as we get to the ground surface, we have this blue arrow, which is illustrating a river, and we have a happy fish in that river, and we have trees, and we have a house, but it's dominated primarily by forest cover. And the blue and red arrows are part of the water and heat budgets, which are written out here, the water balance and the energy balance. And each term is defined on the left for those that want to look more closely. Essentially, what you see are blue and red arrows that are equal size here, and this is ET. It's the way scientists talk about evapotranspiration, or the liquid water vaporizing through soil pores or through vegetation, stomata, or just from a free water mud puddle or lake or pond. And the same sized arrow in red is LE, and that's latent energy. And the two are linked by a relationship of the density of water and what we call heat of vaporization. And if we have evapotranspiration, if we have water passing from liquid to gas, we will have the latent energy. And the latent energy is one of the three terms that balance net radiation. So from our atmosphere, solar radiation and then long wave radiation comes down, and it needs to have a balancing set of terms. And latent energy will be one. There's some latent energy here in the canopy. Ground heat flux will be one, and then sensible heat will be another. And if we move to a scenario where we have less water or less vegetation, the latent energy will go down, and we're going to see that we have greater amounts of sensible energy, and our temperatures will go up. And those are the scenarios that we're dealing with now in urban environments. And we're trying to restore our urban areas to make them cooler and healthier for our communities. This is a very simple with one down arrow and two up, one sideways, or one down, three up. And on the right is revealing that the model itself is working through many more storages and fluxes to represent important details. And iTree in general is a numerical, meaning a mathematical type model, and we care about the structure of our landscape, the functions such as evapotranspiration, the services such as the cooling of the air through that, and then the benefits. So human health is improved, and valuation is moving that into a dollar value so that economists can use it when they are making decisions about returns on investment. And the valuation is something that a lot of people are encouraging more iTree valuation because it helps them explain the importance of trees to those that aren't immediately aware of their environmental ecosystem services. The way our model works is illustrated in this sketch. And I have 5 different land polygons here indicating that our model is a raster or pixel, picture element model that has a grid overlaying our Earth's surface, and each one of those rasters within the grid has a different set of characteristics about land cover and water and energy coming in. And when running the iTreat Cool Air model, we'll always have one of our rasters with a weather station, which is illustrated here and written down here. It's a reference station with the weather being measured. And by measuring weather in one grid, which we will do across New York State, we'll possibly be choosing upwards of 5 or more driving weather stations. We are able to solve a set of equations that allow us to find the value of a mesoscale layer above the land shared by other rasters in the region. And we get our air temperature and our humidity for that mesoscale layer. And then our model will, through its numerical mathematical formulations, be able to determine the air temperature and humidity in every other grid based on its land cover type and its water availability. So that's a little bit of a technical explanation. Many of the terms that are illustrated here are defined for those that want to go deeper. Within the model, we also, as I mentioned, have hydrology being represented, and we use elevation maps across the state, and we analyze those with what we refer to as the topographic index, set of equations shown here, defined here, to come up with wetness likelihood. And then we have groundwater depths, and these are updated at every time step, typically 1 hour time step. And then we know the boundary condition underlying our soils. So that was a technical explanation of what's going on. And now I have a set of images that might be more enjoyable to take in. So here's an illustration of the model being used in Washington, D.C. This is the topographic map that would be used for the wetness likelihood. And you can see general low-lying areas in blue. And this area, now shown in a land cover map, becomes easier to read. We have the Potomac and Anacostia rivers coming in together. And here we have downtown Washington, D.C. And right where my cursor is, we have the National Mall. So we have Martin Luther King and Abe Lincoln memorials down here and congressional offices up here. For those that haven't been to DC, this area in central north area is a large park, and this is green color is forest. And the on the right are telling you that the reds are developed area and the greens are forest types. So our model takes these types of maps that are raster maps, grid across our area of interest. There's another driver of heat that we refer to as anthropogenic heat. This is a product that is provided globally at a much coarser resolution, 1 kilometer. And we're looking at the same city, and this is that downtown area. And they're telling us that we have a certain number of watts per meter squared of heat on a certain hour of a day in August. We have maps that are providing tree canopy cover as a percentage, and that's shown here. So in this park that we looked at earlier, we have very dark greens, high values. And then in the area of the downtown DC and over the water, we have very low values. We have comparable map of impervious cover, and you can imagine it's just the opposite, where we'd have much higher values in the downtown, much lower values in our forested parks. And so those are maps that must go into our modeling, and we're providing those maps as part of this project when we're working in New York State. And We also need time series data that we refer to as meteorological or weather station data. I explained that on an earlier slide. And I'm just showing there's a map of these that are available globally. We will be using a product from the DOE. That's a thermodynamic global warming product for our past and future scenarios. And those weather data need to be processed. And I'm showing that we have a set of scripts that run in Xterm environments, often written in C# or C++, that will process the data and provide us time series of all of our important variables driving the model. Model that we are working with in part A will not have a graphical user interface, and we'll be working with something called a configuration file. These are currently available for download and case studies. People want to try them, for example, in DC. And these highlighted pixels are showing the values of some parameters that describe things like the albedo that we were talking about earlier, the reflectivity, or we talked about soil moisture importance, and we have some initial values and soil types. And then this is a screen on the right showing our model in its working environment running for this Washington, DC analysis, again, without a graphical user interface. After that work, we now have output. And so these are some of the results from the model. So I can go back and show you real quick. This was our land cover. And if you remember the patterns of where blue and dark red and green are, these are the air temperatures that we predicted. We had one weather station of observed data across this entire area, and all the other air temperatures were predicted. And you are seeing the range. And as scientists, we often use Kelvin, which is something that runs at magnitudes higher than Fahrenheit. On the middle slide here, we have some observations that are along the black lines that were collected by Vivek Chandas, a researcher at Portland State at the time. And there were some 7,000 observations for this 1 hour of 3 p.m. on August 28, 2018. And then Vivek used a statistical program to try to correlate his observations with their land cover that was overlying, using a different land cover map than we use. And then he mapped onto all other land cover, even if there was no observation, and predicted temperature. And then as scientists, we often will take the observed and the predicted values and we'll put them into what we call a scatter plot. And that's what we have here. We have the Vivek's observed temperature at those vehicle stations and our predicted. And we use different metrics for analyzing how good the prediction fits the observed. And this is showing that we have a R squared or a correlation coefficient of 0.85. And the pattern that you see here with the cool inside this forest and the hot inside this urban area and a little bit cooler in the mall is very comparable and explained to some of the patterns we see in our landscape. And the differences that we see around the Vivek's, we can have another meeting to talk about why we believe those occurred. We think some of them might be they're picking up some vehicle exhaust, some additional heating imprints that we don't have the ability to simulate, and that they might be missing some of the heat here because they didn't drive into these areas. So they don't have some calibration for some of the more developed.
I don't want to interrupt, but Elizabeth Yampierre has her hand up and she has to jump off at 3 o'clock. So I did want to make sure that her question was addressed.
Thank you. And please interrupt as often as you would like.
Elizabeth?
Sure, thank you. This is so freaking cool. I just have to say, so we have a community-based plan to decarbonize our community, which is an industrial working waterfront community. It has a lot of different pieces. We think it's a really sophisticated plan that addresses a lot of different issues, from renewable energy to drinkable water to food sovereignty. And what occurred to me while you were talking about this is that we are also siloed and we're all working at cross purposes. And I wonder what the availability is for using this research and these interventions that you have laid out so beautifully as an overlay on the community-based plans that are already in existence to address the impact of climate change on frontline communities. Because I think that this is really useful. And the work that is coming out of our communities is also really useful, but this would make it possible for us to address health-related issues that are really important. So anyway, that's the question. I have to jump off to a Boehm call, but I wanted to find out whether that's a possibility to figure out, like, if we shared our plans, would you be able to add these interventions and this research onto that plan so that we could see where the gaps are, where we need to go further, what's working. Anyway, that's it. I hope that's clear.
Yeah, Elizabeth, I think that was clear. I'm going to give you some feedback. Are you able to stay on for another minute while I respond?
I'm on till 2:55.
So let me just take a moment to respond to your query. So the intent is that we will allow for overlays. This is something where we'll be partnering with the GIS folks in the DEC and our GIS specialists on our team. One example of those overlays that exists already, Elizabeth, that you can look at is the iTree landscape. If you Google that, jump online, that tool's available. And it will overlay, as I was mentioning, environmental data, whether it's environmental services or environmental pollutants with census data. So down here, I have a table open up and it's showing you certain census block groups that are selected within the area of DC and showing its exposure to different concerns. So that might be one thing to look at. And then the other is, just about to get to this, the model, because it is a physically driven model, will allow for us to run different physical scenarios. So we can change tree cover, TC, or impervious cover, IC, bring tree cover up, bring impervious cover down, and look at what the air temperature would be across our community with that change. So in the past, we had 100.5 degree maximum. We're able to bring that down to 97.8. And that's just a maximum reduction. The averages are going to be more important for more people. And these maps, again, will be GIS products. And I have a sense that this DEC team that we're working with, intentionally trying to bring these in to overlay them with the DACs and to make sure that they can be used in planning. So thank you for your interest. And you made my day by saying that this was a cool presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
So this is, as I explained, the opportunity for the tool, and this gets into what we're talking about in terms of Part B. So Part A would be developing the intensity, duration, frequency analysis of extreme heat events across New York for 20 years, 10 in the past, 10 in the future. And then Part B will be running a set of scenarios of changing some of our land cover, our land properties, water availability, to look at feasible cooling scenarios. And we'll be focusing in on areas where we have known plantable space, where we believe trees can get in. The model has many other features. Time series is one way of describing this plot, where you have dates or hours in time moving along this lower axis. And you can have a variable like air temperature or dew point temperature, which is a surrogate of relative humidity. And you can overlay different scenarios with the base case. So my base case in the red solid line has some high temperature at an hour around 2 in the afternoon, moving towards 3. And then I do the 20% change in land cover and I can see how much I cool that. The cooling is less dramatic at night, which is shown here, closer to 4, 5 hour, which is going to be right before dawn, and greater during the midday. And for those that study relative humidity and dew point, you know that during night, the values are often at their highest, and then as the air warms, they lower. In this type of map on the left, maybe a bit more arcane, it's showing the change and not an absolute like value, but the difference between two scenarios, the base case and this alternative of evapotranspiration. And so it's saying that the river was evaporating less under this new scenario. The urban area that was in the center, and here's the National Mall in turquoise, is evaporating a lot more because we've increased the tree cover. And then areas like the forested park are about zero. Orange is about zero. It's not a big difference because you didn't see any real change in tree cover there. And this will be information that's useful for planners because then they can understand how much more water do we need in these landscapes to provide a healthy, sustainable forest. So I've already shown you the next slide, which is describe overlays, and that's something that will not be landscape for this project, but I believe the DEC partners and our GIS folks are going to come up with something that works best for you through that interactive toolkit. And then I want to come back to what Mark was discussing, which is the climate change drivers. So the importance of looking at 20 years, 10 of them in the future, is to allow for us to get a better understanding of what we're being told will be more extreme heat and how we can make sure that our designs that we're planning for will manage that future climate. And I'd like to finish by recognizing that these are complex systems. A watershed is an area that contains the rainwaters and groundwaters for a region and brings them to one common point, a lake or a river. And within these watersheds, we have humans, non-humans, and we have a set of provisions or resources coming from our ecosystem to the humans, and the humans have impacts on those. And this cycle has within it, at this point in our lives, restoration, where we're trying to restore our systems to provide more services. And our systems are often degraded. So our urban environments have often removed many trees, and we've lost the cooling services. We have some communities that are able to put those trees back sooner and others that are going to need our assistance. And when the system is broken and not working, we think there might be easy fixes, but we've come to recognize that these fixes often aren't that easy and they require paradigm or shifts in our thinking. And so I respect that this Climate Justice Working Group has been getting through this, and that the work that Leo and Mark have been doing outside of this one project is helping the communities with this paradigm shift. And that's going to be the undertaking that is going to be some of the hardest work. And I want to also recognize that I sit here in Syracuse within the Onondaga Haudenosaunee community, and I've learned a lot from listening to their wisdom speakers and others, including our colleague at ESF, Robin Kimmerer, speak about this and write about this. And they have a prayer of thanksgiving that they end up giving a shout out and celebration to the purpose of water and their lands and the wisdom in which they have to recognize the importance and duties of these other elements around them, and the agreement that they have to give thanks. They do this beginning of important meetings, and at the end of their statements during this celebration, they say, now our minds are one. And this approach of recognizing the duties and the importance of nature is one that I believe we're moving toward as we recognize that we have the opportunity to restore our systems and live more sustainably within them. And so with that, I have an acknowledgement of hope and an acknowledgement of the complexity and challenges. But thank you for that opportunity. I have the ability to take any questions, and I have slides that were developed by my colleague, Jay Hepler, that go into a little bit more detail about any one of the many tasks that we discussed as Part A and Part B.
I see Rawa has her hand up. Rawa?
Yes, hello, how are you? I really found this presentation to be incredibly helpful. It really is sort of the approach that many frontline community-based and EJ organizations take when we try to understand what the root causes of all of the different systems that are interplaying in our communities, right? It's not just about a changing climate. It has to do with racial and economic inequality, an extractive economy. And all of this was really presented in a very compelling scientific manner, right? And I think it's incredibly helpful. I guess my question was, I really appreciated Elizabeth's questions around how do you overlay this around the root cause issues that we're addressing in our respective communities? And my secondary question to that is, how is DEC thinking about aligning this sort of approach through interagency? Because so much of the public health data around root cause issues and social determinants of health is with DOH. It's also a transportation issue. Obviously, we also need the Public Service Commission. As we think about tree canopy, one of the biggest egregious issues in my own community is the east side of Buffalo, where 85% of the Black community lives, redlined, high unemployment, lack of access to quality education, aging infrastructure, you name it. We're dealing with it with every health outcome. But my frustration was that a couple of years ago, National Grid cut down a bunch of the trees or the foliage itself in order to make sure the power lines weren't gonna, I don't know, whatever, right? And so that is both a racial justice and an environmental justice issue that is happening a lot in our communities. How are we working with utilities and to ensure that does not continue, that practice is no longer in place?
Thank you, Rob. Your comments are very uplifting. You were able to discern my presentation elements that connect with those important drivers in iteration of Elizabeth's question regarding that is at the heart. That's that goal that we set out at the very beginning with the DEC and then implemented tasks A and B to get us there. And we will have, during this process, a working group that will be comprised of the DEC, and we're hoping at least one member from the Climate Justice Working Group, and then other stakeholders. And I think that's the work that Leo has also been engaged in. So I think you're on target, that we are aware of the obstacles and the hurdles and the injustice and the need for restorative action. And I think we have mechanisms identified to bring key constituents along with us as we develop. With that, I'd like to ask whether Mark has anyone on his team that would like to also respond. And if anyone on my team would like to respond, please put your hand up.
I will just respond for DEC that we don't see the products that are going to be delivered through this project as simply only for DEC. There will be public facing aspects, and we would envision that as the products are finished, we will we'll be consulting with our fellow agencies, including the Department of Transportation. The Department of Health has already been involved. Neil Muscatello is obviously a member of this working group. I don't believe he's on today, but we have been talking to him. He has helped review the scope of work that Dr. Andreni is going to be working under and has made comments. So there already is a substantial amount of interagency conversation. We actually have, for those of you who aren't aware of it, an interagency climate adaptation and resilience work group that my office coordinates, that has representatives from at least 24 state agencies and authorities. And once we have Dr. Andreni and his team actually getting paid, we will probably pull him in to make a presentation like this to those agency staff to make sure that they're aware of the kind of product we're developing and begin to think about how they might be able to use that as well. But I would also say that agencies and authorities have to be accountable to the public. And if, as this material is rolled out and becomes available, if you see planning projects that are not taking advantage of this resource, let those agencies know about it, and hold them accountable to using the resources that you, the taxpayer, are paying to have produced.
Hi, Mark. Can I just jump in really quickly? I have a question regarding, since you mentioned the public having access to the tools, is there a timeline sort of for that, start to finish? And so we can kind of see, you know, like a timeline between the start of the finishing the tasks in part A and then in part B. And do we know when we might have these tools available for public consumption?
But it won't be weeks or months. There's a lot of work between
Right.
now and the ultimate goal. If we are able to get a signed MOU, get all the I's dotted and T's crossed in time, I believe Ted has indicated we can probably have the hottest hour maps, those snapshots of historic areas of extreme heat in early 2024. The statutory deadline is actually somewhere in March of 2024, but then the entire timeline, I believe, runs out for almost 3 full years till we finish the entire project. Is that correct, Ted? Do you recall?
Yeah, thank you, Alana, for the question. If you have any way of helping us speed up the MOU, we welcome that. That's the memorandum of agreement that will allow us to actually initiate the project. And yes, we will have a set of files that can be used within GIS systems, and any user or group that wants to have them overlay, that should be within 3 months of the initial project start. And those will be just a simple hottest hour. They won't give us the intensity and the duration and frequency of heat events for the past 10 years or the future 10, and they will not look at different mitigation scenarios. Those products will come out in about the next year and a half. We'll have our base case, and then the scenarios will follow that.
Yeah, I had one other question, which is, are we able to get a copy of this slide presentation that you presented today?
Certainly. And I wish you best of luck. And it usually will perform on a laptop or desktop. We'll make it available through Mark's office.
Thank you.
Yes, I have those. I'll send them to Alana, and Alana is welcome then to distribute them to the group.
Fabulous. And I want to say too, Mark, like when when you're having Ted and other folks presenting to that adaptation and resiliency interagency working group, I would also love for members of the Climate Justice Working Group or EJ leaders, you know, around New York State to also have an opportunity to both learn from them, but also to present to them about, you know, how we see working across systems and working in community and in ways that are relevant. And I think that we could be really helpful to each other as the plans are being developed.
You can expect a call then about talking to the interagency group. I think that would be great.
Invitation.
Do you have any more questions?
Yep, just to say, does anybody else have any questions, comments that they would like to put forth? Oh, Rob will look forward to your call, Mark.
I'll just add, we are trying to wrap up the scope of work. It was distributed to the members of the group as a draft. This is not something that we would anticipate rolling out for public comment, but we are required by the statute to consult with the Climate Justice Working Group, and we look forward to continuing to provide updates and get input as the project rolls along. I would ask, because we're trying to wrap it up and let Ted and his colleagues actually get to work as quickly as possible, If members of the Climate Justice Working Group do have other questions or comments on the scope of work, you could get those directly to me within about the next 2 weeks or so. That would be really helpful.
Okay. If there are no other questions, thank you, Mark, Dr. I'm going to say your name wrong. Endreny?
Yes, Alana Indreni. You can call me.
Indreny. I'm putting the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable. Indreny, thank you so much for your presentation. We'll make sure that that's available for working group members. And we'll move on with the rest of our meeting. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
All right, if we could get our slides up. Thank you, Emma. Okay, so then that was a great presentation. Like I said, I will make sure that those slides are available for working group members as soon as possible. Next slide. So DEC recently released a permitting policy for permits in disadvantaged communities for public comment. This is a policy that would provide guidance during our permitting process for how and when to consider the impacts on disadvantaged communities under Section 7.3 of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, or the Climate Act. And that section requires all agencies and entities to avoid disproportionate burdens while prioritizing greenhouse gas and co-pollutant reductions in these communities. So Eddie, I know you said that you had a couple of questions on that.
Yes, thanks, Alana. And for what it's worth, I'm staying off camera because that mid-afternoon, late, fall glare is just like it's impossible to see. Yeah, I guess what I wanted to ask about this is in the context of the recently released New York State Controller audit of DEC's air permitting work. Before I say anything further, obviously, I just want to say that, it may not always feel like that for DEC, but, a lot of us have a lot of love for DEC, and we know how much work you all have had to carry over the years without the resources you need to properly execute the full agency mission. So that's something that we're obviously for a long time been aware of. That said, when our reading of this audit was really disturbing. Like our sense, I think what the way we processed the audit, it found that something like more than half of the state's facilities may not have been operating in compliance with air pollution control requirements because the DEC hasn't addressed permits or registrations issued before 2013. And our permits that don't expire, right? So, for example, again, our reading of that audit is that the state controller's report found that 20% of facilities across New York have old permits that have been extended between 4 and 9 years, and that a majority of sites within EJ areas are found to be exempt from current requirements. So the reason I'm saying all this is like several questions come to mind and concerns. One is that it seems like DEC hasn't addressed facilities with permits or registrations that were issued prior to 2013 and that don't expire and may not be operating in compliance with current requirements. Our other read of this is that the State Administrative Procedure Act extensions allow these facilities to continue polluting without updating their polluting control standards over time, and that DEC is not always taking action to enforce compliance for operating without a permit. And then finally, I think the other thing that kind of jumped out at us is that DEC is using outdated 2003 census data to identify potential EJ areas, despite 2010, not to mention 2020 census data. So I guess all this raises the following, I guess, concerns for us. One is, DEC is now going to embark on a Section 7.3, disproportionate burdens guidance process where you guys will be accepting public comment, and that's all well and good, but it raises the question if DEC itself is inadequately handling air pollution exceedances in our communities, like, is DEC in a position to opine how to reduce disproportionate burdens? I got to say, physician, heal thyself, right? But that's the first concern. The second concern is, the air quality study that's happening right now with the ACLIMA studies that you guys have that have been at times, I think, reported at these climate working groups. But if the DEC air quality monitoring initiative states that's going to, part of it is, with this ACLIMA partnership, it's going to identify and mitigate hotspots for emissions. One wonders how serious is that if DEC is already failing to control emitters through existing regulations that you guys are tasked to enforce. And then finally, I think the thing that's raised the most concern for us is that, DEC and the state is currently working on a cap, trade, and invest system that's going to force, 40% economy-wide reduction and the 85% reduction by 2050. Like, how is the state going to hold entities to these new standards and enforce emission and air quality reductions if those standards aren't being evaluated and updated right now with current information? So as you can imagine, I'll stop there, but a range of alarms have gone off for us about this audit from the state controller, and whether it's Section 7.3 reg stuff that you guys are rolling out now, the ongoing air quality testing, or the cap, trade, and invest. This has raised a lot of questions for us about DEC's ability to be able to not just handle existing regulatory authority, but these new provisions that are coming out. I know that was a lot, so I'll stop there. I do want to make a pitch. I personally would find it extremely instructive and I think really relevant to the work of this Climate Justice Working Group if we can invite to the next Climate Justice Working Group a representative of the New York State Controller's Office to discuss this audit, obviously coupled with DEC's responding to it. And I would even welcome, I think the rest of the group would also welcome, if you guys, we can identify maybe independent air quality experts to also kind of share their perspective. So it's not like a controller versus, a state agency debate, but we can have an independent air quality expert opine. Again, a lot of us have to be jacks of all trades. So I'm not, none of us, at least from the NEJA side of things, we're not air quality modeling experts. But I think it might be helpful if you guys are willing and open to having the controller's office come into our next meeting, discuss their audit, DEC respond. It might also be helpful to have an independent perspective on this. So I know that's a lot. Let me stop there. But again, this audit really kind of jumped out at us and raised all kinds of flags. So I'll stop there.
No, thanks, Eddie. With response to the audit, yes, we obviously we saw the audit, and DEC is currently working on our response. I am also not an air monitoring expert or air modeling expert, so I'm not the right person to respond to a couple of things you said. But we can definitely potentially schedule something with people from our Division of Air Resources to kind of go over some of that with you. I'm obviously not the best person to discuss that, but we can definitely go and talk about that a little bit offline. With regards to, I can respond to the EJ mapping issue, because that is something that we worked on, that the data we have obviously been updated the data and the maps for our environmental justice mapping. Those were updated in 2021. And like I said, we are formulating a response to the comptroller on several points. And that will be made public when we're finished with that. But as for, bringing DAR to discuss some of the elements of this, that's something we can absolutely do. I'm not sure about the comptroller necessarily, but that's something that we can discuss offline.
Thanks, Alana. Yeah, would be interested in hearing from the rest of the group, but all points are well taken. For what it's worth, I mean, I'm making a formal request that the controller's office present on their audit at our next call. I know you guys probably need to talk about this internally, but and again, with the obvious, caveat that you guys will be on the call and you can clearly respond to whatever the controller's office is saying, but this cuts to the heart of the work of this climate justice working group. And so, yeah, I wouldn't want, an audit that raises fundamental questions about an agency's ability to accomplish or execute core pieces of what's, of work that's central to the climate justice working group. It would feel like a huge lost opportunity if you guys aren't able to have this kind of conversation with the control or addressing the controller's office concerns at a future climate justice working group meeting. So again, it's a formal request, and I know you guys probably need to talk about that. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there. Thank you.
Nope. Yep. We definitely would need to take that back. I can't make that decision on my own. That's a little above my pay grade. But no, thank you for bringing that up. Again, understand the concerns, and I will take that up the chain and see exactly what we can do on that. But we can definitely get folks from DAR, and I'll look further into the other questions about the comptroller's office. So thanks, Eddie, for bringing that. Next, just again on 7.3, we are looking to have Dan Whitehead, our director for the Division of Environmental Permits, maybe attend our next meeting to answer any questions that anybody might have on 23.1. So that we'll look forward to that. And we are accepting public comments on this until November 27th. So again, any questions on that, send them along to me. Next slide. So I sent a poll around for folks for our next meeting. So that will probably be our last meeting for 2023. So I really need everybody to indicate their availability for the next meeting, since it's going to need to be in person, because we are going to have to approve the bylaws and we're going to have to vote to approve the minutes from our last meeting. So like I said, I definitely want to have a discussion regarding the policy on permitting and disadvantaged communities. Now that with the comptroller's audit, definitely want to make sure that we have our folks from Air Resources come in. And again, Eddie, I will bring your request for the comptroller or members of comptroller's office to be there up to the powers that be. But please make sure to respond to the poll by close of business on October 10th so we can get that meeting scheduled as soon as possible and get locations reserved. Does anybody have any questions or comments on that? Okay. I don't see any hands up. So thanks everyone for this. Please remember to respond to the poll so I can get that meeting scheduled as soon as possible. I will make sure that this presentation is available for working group members. I'll try to get that to SharePoint before the end of the day. And we'll try to get this version of it up on the website as soon as possible. So if anybody, if we don't have any more questions or comments, I will close things out for today, and hopefully we'll see everyone very soon. All right, everyone, enjoy what might be the very last really nice day until summer, and I will speak to you all soon. Right, bye everybody.